When Karen called the police on a black man, labeling him as a poor nobody, she could never have imagined that he was the new owner of the building. Her actions sparked a scandal that would turn their lives upside down. What followed would shock even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the beginning. Mark Williams casually approached the massive glass doors of the residential complex, a suitcase in one hand and a keycard in the other. His modest tracksuit was practical for travel, but gave no hint of his status. He stepped toward the door to enter, only to find his path suddenly blocked by a short elderly woman with a piercing glare. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded sharply, positioning her shopping cart to obstruct him. Mark raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Excuse me? I'm going to my home," he replied calmly. The woman snorted. "Your home? I don't think so. This is a luxury complex, not a shelter. People like you don't belong here." Mark tried to keep his composure. "My name is Mark Williams. I recently purchased this building. May I pass?" Her face flushed crimson with indignation. "Owner?" she repeated, as if it were a joke. "You look like you can barely afford a bus ticket. Get out of here." Understanding the situation was escalating, Mark held up his keycard, but the woman refused to even look at it. Instead, she whipped out her phone and began making a call. "Police, please come quickly. Some vagrant is trying to break into our building," she said loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began gathering nearby. Some pulled out their phones to record the incident. A young man in the crowd leaned over and whispered, "Hey, isn't that the new owner? I saw him at a meeting recently." But Karen seemed oblivious. She continued her tirade. "I won't let people like you jeopardize our safety." Mark took a step back, trying not to escalate the situation further. "You're making a mistake. Let's wait for the police," he said calmly. The crowd grew larger, buzzing with murmured conversations. People exchanged glances, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control. Mark stood quietly on the side, refusing to engage further. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. A patrol car screeched to a halt in front of the building. Officers James Rodriguez and his partner, Sarah Thompson, stepped out quickly. Karen rushed toward them, gesturing dramatically. "Thank you for coming so fast," she exclaimed, clutching her chest theatrically. "This man tried to break into our building. He's aggressive, and I fear for my safety." Officer Rodriguez glanced at Mark, who stood calmly nearby with his suitcase. His composed demeanor was at odds with Karen's description. "Good afternoon, sir," Rodriguez said. "May I see your identification?" Mark nodded, pulling out his ID and the building's keycard. "Of course, officer. Here are my documents. I'm the owner of this complex." Karen's face flushed with anger. "Owner? That's ridiculous. He doesn't even look like someone who could afford rent here, let alone ownership." Officer Thompson frowned. "Ma'am, we'll handle this. Please remain calm." Rodriguez carefully examined Mark's documents. Everything checked out. He glanced at his partner, and they exchanged brief nods. "Mr. Williams, we apologize for the inconvenience. It's clear that you are indeed the owner," Rodriguez said. Karen froze, her expression one of disbelief. "That's impossible. He must have forged something. Check again." Rodriguez turned sharply to her. "Ma'am, your call was based on false assumptions. Mr. Williams has not broken any laws and has every right to be here." Embarrassed and furious, Karen pulled out her phone to start recording. "This is outrageous. I demand you protect law-abiding citizens from people like him." Meanwhile, some of the bystanders began to speak up. "That's the new owner. I saw him at the residents' meeting," someone in the crowd called out. "She's clearly gone too far this time," added another. The officers worked to calm the growing tension. Rodriguez turned to Karen, his tone firm but measured. "Filing a false police report is a serious offense. I suggest you stop escalating this situation." Karen glared at him but fell silent. Mark, watching her flustered expression, said calmly, "I told you, you were making a mistake." The crowd began to disperse, though cameras continued rolling. Videos of the incident started circulating online almost immediately. Mark collected his belongings and entered the building without another word, leaving Karen standing outside, her face flushed with frustration. Karen remained by the entrance, her face burning with shame and anger. The crowd thinned, but whispers lingered in the air. "Did you see that? She didn't even recognize the new owner," one neighbor remarked. "Her racism has always been annoying, but today she outdid herself," added another. Meanwhile, Mark ascended to the second floor, where the residents' common room was located. He asked the concierge to gather everyone for an urgent meeting. Minutes later, the residents began trickling into the spacious room. Karen entered last, glancing nervously around. Mark stood confidently at the center of the room and addressed the gathering. "Good evening. My name is Mark Williams, and I'm the new owner of this building. Today, I experienced something that I believe should make us all reflect." A murmur spread through the room, and Karen stiffened. "Some people believe they can judge others solely based on their appearance or skin color," Mark continued. "That kind of thinking is unacceptable, especially in a community where we all live together." One resident raised a hand. "We saw Karen call the police on you. That was completely out of line." Karen snapped back defensively. "I was only trying to protect the building. I didn't know who he was. It was a mistake." Mark looked directly at her, his tone calm but firm. "The mistake was in your approach. You didn't ask a single question. You immediately assumed I had no right to be here. This isn't about safety. It's about bias." Residents began nodding, murmuring their agreement. Karen, feeling their stares, tried to justify herself. "I was thinking about everyone's well-being. Is that a crime?" A woman from the crowd stood up. "Karen, what you did embarrassed all of us. We can't live in a community built on distrust and discrimination." Mark raised his hand, signaling for silence. "I don't want anyone to feel humiliated. Instead, I'm proposing we organize a training on inclusion and bias awareness. We need to create a community that respects everyone." Some residents applauded, showing their support for the idea. Karen looked mortified but muttered quietly, "That's a good idea." Mark concluded, "I'm willing to give everyone a chance to change, but change begins with acknowledging our mistakes." The meeting ended, but the video of Karen's confrontation with Mark continued to gain traction online, sparking widespread discussions about bias and the need for societal change. By the next day, the video of Karen's confrontation with Mark had amassed millions of views. Social media erupted with heated discussions, condemning her actions. Comments ranged from furious to empathetic, but the overwhelming consensus was clear. Change was desperately needed. Karen woke up to find her phone inundated with calls and notifications. Her name had gone viral. Local news headlines read, "Resident of luxury complex calls police on owner due to his skin color." Panic set in as Karen realized the magnitude of the backlash. Even acquaintances began avoiding her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Meanwhile, Mark was busy implementing his plan. He had invited inclusion specialists to host a workshop for the residents. Karen received a personal invitation from Mark. Her pride urged her to refuse, but the weight of public opinion left her no choice but to attend. The workshop was held in the building's common room, with residents gathering to listen. The facilitator spoke about bias, shared examples of discrimination, and discussed strategies to confront internal stereotypes. Karen sat quietly at first, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When the facilitator encouraged participants to share personal experiences, Karen suddenly raised her hand. "I want to apologize," she began, her voice trembling. "My reaction the other day was wrong. I judged someone without knowing them, based on my own fears and prejudices." The room fell silent. Mark watched her with an unreadable expression. "I realize now that I was in the wrong," Karen continued, "but I want to change." The facilitator thanked her for her honesty, and Mark stood, turning to address the residents. "It's moments like these that give us a chance to grow," he said. "Karen, I accept your apology." The residents broke into applause. Karen looked relieved, though her eyes glistened with tears. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the building noticeably improved. Residents began engaging with one another more, organizing community events. Karen, eager to redeem herself, became an active participant in initiatives proposed by Mark. The story extended beyond the building, sparking widespread conversations about bias and inclusion. Journalists highlighted how a single incident transformed the community, and Mark was invited to speak at conferences on inclusivity and leadership. Karen often sat in the lobby now, greeting neighbors with a warm smile. Every time Mark walked by, she would quietly say, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Mark always replied, "We're all learning. The important thing is not to fear change.